Hey guys. So stretching. This is an interesting topic. There's a lot of misinformation out there and a lot of confusion as to what we should be doing with the different types of stretching. So really we have three different ways of stretching: static stretching, dynamic stretching, we're moving, or another form of dynamic stretching is stretching under load. So let's say we're squatting. That's a form of dynamic stretching. Even though we're exercising, we're still actually working through the range of motion, and you can gain range of motion. So the thing with static stretching, we've been told, okay, maybe we shouldn't do that before we work out. But what is the actual science on static stretching, and is it even a good thing altogether? So with static stretching, what the research has actually found is that if you wanted to lengthen your muscle, you would have to stretch that muscle between 30 minutes and an hour. So way more than what we're doing. And we also have to think, is this even something that we want? Do we want to stretch a muscle, make it longer? So what we actually do when we're static stretching and we temporarily gain that range of motion, what that most likely is our body temporarily shutting off those inhibitors that are saying we shouldn't go past this range of motion. And then we can temporarily go into that stretch, into that range of motion that we couldn't before. But this doesn't stay. You may find you can stretch one day and then you gain that range of motion, the next day it's gone. That's because you're just temporarily doing it. And is this something that we even want? Because if we're temporarily increasing that range of motion, we may not actually have the strength yet in that range of motion. This is why it's commonly said you shouldn't static stretch before you do something before performance. Because you may stretch that hamstring or that calf and you may temporarily gain that range of motion, but your body isn't ready for that yet. You haven't built strength in that range of motion yet, and you have more likelihood to tear a muscle in doing that. So is static stretching even a good thing? And that's the question, because we're not actually lengthening the muscle, and when we do get that range of motion, we may not have the strength there yet. So let's go to dynamic stretching, or stretching under load. So when we're stretching under load, then also we're gaining that range of motion, but also we're building the strength in that range of motion that we need. So if we're doing a calf raise, bending the knee, and we're working on slowly going down deep into that range of motion with weights or without, depending on where you're at, we're building not only range of motion, but also strength in that area, so that your body knows, okay, I'm strong in that deep range of motion, I'm more likely to keep that range of motion for longer than one day. So that being said, right now what the research says is that loaded, dynamic range of motion stretching is actually the best way to do it. It's far superior, because not only you're not having that potential of injury at the beginning, but also building that strength into that range of motion that you wouldn't have with static stretching. So that's why we've been saying do the static stretching at the beginning, and that'll last longer. Okay, so dynamic stretching, right? But is there a reason to static stretch? Because you still see people static stretching, even people in high-level sports. So why would they be static stretching if I just said what I said? Well, people may have been doing this for a long time and they get a relaxing feel out of it. And this is huge. It may seem like nothing, but this is huge. The mental aspect here for recovery, it creates that placebo. And you will temporarily gain a little bit of range of motion, which may be helpful in certain situations if you're not going directly into sport. So I'll let my mom go on this. So it may not be totally bad under the right circumstances.
You see, these are the type of discussions we have at the breakfast table. And I just said, okay, let's stop that right here and share it, because I think it's valuable information. With the stretching, as I see it, it makes you feel good temporarily. It gives you a little bit more range of motion temporarily, but it never lasts for me. What I find is much more effective is actually think of it as the fascia and the positions. So think of owning certain positions. If you can't go into a position because your body is locked out, the fascia is stuck, you have adhesions, you have scar tissue, you have something that prevents you from being in a position that you need, then you need to address that. Do you need super long hamstrings? Do you need to be able to do the splits? Absolutely not. In fact, it can be detrimental to some of the training that we do. And I've seen it before where people have extremely long hamstrings. They cannot effectively use them doing a deadlift, for example. Then they overload their backs, right? So as Riley said, flexibility without stability is useless because you don't have that stability in your joint. So what I think is, if you're able to be going through all the range of motion, and that would be your squat, your lunge, your bench, your push, your press, your twist. So if you can do all 7 human movement patterns with correct form, you probably have the right length tension in your body to be a good human being. However, if you cannot get your arms up here, you might have a problem here. Is it important to address that? Absolutely. Is static stretching going to do it for you? Likely not. So what we thought is we're going to take you through a few. You want to say something?
I want to say something.
Oh, I know you do.
That's a great point. That's a great point. And that's what we preach. How much mobility do you need? Really, what you need is enough to get into the positions that you need to. And that depends on what you're doing. If you're a dancer, you're going to need a lot of mobility in the spine. Is that necessarily a good thing long term? Maybe not. You're creating a lot of friction and that can lead to some back problems, but you need that. If you're a sprinter, if you measure sprinters' hamstring flexibility, doesn't exist. They don't have great hamstring flexibility, but these guys are the top athletes in the world. Why is that? Because they don't need to get low. They never need to get low into a deep squat. They don't need to extend that hamstring that far so that they need a really loose hamstring. And that is actually helpful for them. Same thing with basketball players, same thing with football players, because when you have that tighter muscle, it provides more of that elastic rebound. So you can actually be more springy. Let's take that to the other extreme. You're an Olympic weightlifter, or you're someone that loves deep squatting. Well, then now you need that range. You need crazy flexion in your ankles, you need crazy flexion in your hips, and you need to be not only flexible, but also strong in those positions. So they're totally different athletes. So when you think about stretching, first thing, what is the goal? What positions do I need to get into? If you can get into those positions, you may not need to stretch anymore. And also there may be a difference between getting into that position body weight and getting into it under load. Because if you can't do a body weight, but you can do a squat perfectly under load, that may be a good thing, because then you're actually getting that stretch reflex from the muscle, and that's providing a little bit more power. And we actually want that. We don't want to avoid that. We don't want to stretch you to the point where now you can't actually utilize that.
So point being, know what you need it for. If you play volleyball and your serve needs to come from back here, you're going to need more range of motion than most people, and you need to be able to have a stable joint in this position. Mm-hmm. Do we all need that? No. So before we talk you to death, let's just go into a few stretches here that, like, for the major muscles that we really should be addressing. So for most people, the chest is an issue. So a great stretch for opening up this area is actually going into a lunge position. You're going to bring your arms down here, and we're going up and stretching up here, and then bring that back down. Remember, dynamic, up the other way. Good. And you can put your knee down at the back. That's perfectly fine. We're trying to increase that range of motion while moving. Inhale and then exhale. Try to work with your breath as much as you can. And up. Good. All right. Now, another really good one is, and we've done that earlier, is when you come down from here, hold your toes. You want to walk us through that one?
Mm-hmm. And then you're going to drop down into a squat. So this may already be tough, but just hanging out in this position. And then you're gonna raise your hands. And now this is gonna force you under a movement to get thoracic extension and also into your hips when you're doing this.
So you're gonna come forward, let your hips drop down, bring your hands forward, lean a little bit into here. Now my knees are resting on my elbows, and then I pivot back, lift my arms, and come back up. Let's do it one more time. Bring it down, touch your toes, bend it down, keep your knees out, elbows in. Let's put a little bit of weight into this. And back, arms up.
And back. Okay, so let's talk about the ankles. They are a big problem for a lot of people when they're squatting. Their ankles get tight and then they can't get the knees forward. So let's take first the static stretch, which would be just holding it here, but how can we turn this into a dynamic loaded stretch? So what we talked about, so this makes a little bit more sense, and we can actually build strength in that area and it can last a little bit longer. So what you can do is grab a bench, or you can even do this just on the walls, turn this into a calf raise. So what you're doing is you're keeping the knee bent, raising up, but now you're going slow down and pushing that heel into the ground. So now you're doing the same thing, but now you're doing it under load and under a movement. So now you're telling your body, okay, I can get this range of motion because I'm actually becoming stronger in this area as well. You can do that also on the step.
All right, so for me, as for the hip flexor, one of my favorites is keeping that dynamic as well. So you're gonna bring this forward and then just moving into it, reaching forward, coming up, tucking the tailbone under, moving over to the side. Inhale, and then pulling it back. So just really keeping that entire range. Inhale, rolling forward, dipping deep inside, and back up, and over to the side, tucking the tail under, getting the hip flexor, and then back. Right? A nice sequence that works really well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even the stuff we do right at the beginning, for example, hip openers. They may seem like just something as a warm, but you're actually working on your range of motion and working through that area. So you're going up high and creating a lot of space. This is something that's really helped me as well. And you can create really good hip. I never stretch my hips statically, and I have very good hip range of motion because I do this dynamic stuff and it stays. I don't have to worry about stretching it every single day because I'm getting into these positions all the time that's making it stay there. Ankles I need to work on, but that's the point right there, right?
See, your brain doesn't remember the static part, it remembers movement. And if you get comfortable in a movement, your body stores that information. It knows, okay, I'm okay being here. This works for me. Now, does everybody need to be able to go down this deep? Probably not. I can. But, you know, my body doesn't stop me. I don't have to work very hard to get in there. So we've got the glutes, right? This one here. We got the quads.
Hamstring, even just a simple leg swing. Keeping the legs straight.
Yeah.
That's working dynamically through that range of motion.
Absolutely.
Or even a deadlift. A deadlift, when you're doing a deadlift, you're working on that range of motion. And you may, if you can do a deadlift, you may not want to stretch your hamstrings anymore because you're taking away some of their power in that bottom end.
Okay, so you show that one and then.
So the hip, we're going to work on working through the hip range of motion here, making it a little bit more challenging by grabbing our leg. And now at the bottom, now you're going deep into that hip, may go into the hamstring too, so if you actually do need the hamstring, you're building that in a position of stability. You're working on the stability, telling your body, okay, it's okay to go into this position.
All right, so that's it for taking our breakfast discussion online, and hopefully it will be food for thought. And if you have any comments, let us know. we're happy to discuss this further because I know that many people are struggling with how to do this properly. Have a great day.